just the bridge aspect of a sim game just sounds like the most boring thing on earth. Like, I build Windows. It's Windows Sims. Like,
I would play that too. Just so we're clear.
Just
Where should the
to
play
put this
class
on-
go? Oh, I think it'd be great if it was a circular with beams.
But do you want to have UV spray on it? Like, what kind of a window would you want? There we go. Sim Windows. We just created that.
Well, as long as they broke, and there was some sort of physics engine in the game.
You just
that
want
made
to
them
see
break
things.
hilariously. I think a window building
So
sim
you want to see the destruction afterward.
would be great.
Yeah. Okay. All right. As long as the windows break and you can build
That's the
bridges.
key of
and-
any contraption game. It has to be able to fail spectacularly.
I need to start making these games. I'm just going to submit some proposals. I think we are live right now. So hello, everyone who is tuning in right now to we are over here, right there. Awesome.
Where are we?
You are tuning into Close to the Metal. So this is our weekly podcast here where we and live stream where we talk about some more in-depth aspects of computing and a lot of different things. We want to hear your suggestions too. So go ahead and email us podcast@digitaltrends.com. I know this has been up for a little bit. We've already got some people in here. This is a hotly contested topic, I think, that we're going to be going into today. And we've got a few different ways we're going to go about this. We're going to kind of slowly get into this. We want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, what you want to talk about. We've already got, Legend of Zelda fans are already here joining us.
So that makes
excellent.
sense.
Makes sense when we come down to this.
I think they run best on NVIDIA hardware, right? Legend of Zelda?
So I'm your host, Greg Nibbler, and here with me today, before we get into this, we've got
Matt Smith.
Matt Smith.
Brad Burke?
And Brad Burke. Hello, gentlemen.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
Yeah,
all
Chill.
right. Okay, all right. Very
I'm
excited.
sure we're going to have a very reasonable conversation.
I'm sure it's
I feel
going to
good
be
about that.
very mellow, very measured. Just a pleasant discussion that's going to happen on this. That's all. That's what we're expecting anyway. All right, let's get to the topic at hand. What we're going to start off with, and it has to do with Nvidia just releasing their new card, the GTX 1060, which I think actually just came out yesterday. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Technically, the launch date was yesterday.
Yes.
And so let's maybe get a little bit of review, like what we're looking at with this new Nvidia card and where they're trying to head with this. Matt, can you give us a kind of basic description?
Yeah, so the GTX 1060 is based off the new Pascal architecture, and it's the new mid-range card for Nvidia. They released their 1080, 1070 earlier, and those are
Which
quite-
wasn't
quite
too long
expensive.
ago, right?
It was a few months for
Few months.
the 1080, and those are expensive cards. They're for really serious gamers that want to play very high resolutions, high details all the time. So the 1060 is more of the mid-range offering. This sort of whatever ends in the 60, 960, back to 460 and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
Those have always been mid-range cards.
Okay.
So this is the one that most people are going to be interested in to actually own and buy.
Right. So the 1070, 1080, what's what's the average retail, would you say, for that?
The 1070 is 380.
Yeah, 379.
380, and what's the 1080 at? It's over 500.
Yeah, I think it is.
And that's average retail. And it's important to point out that there has been some price foolishness going on because they were so rare when they were released that price scalpers were just jacking the prices way up.
Man.
That's starting to stabilize now. But it will be interesting to see if we see anything happen like that with the GTX 1060. I think some people were posting on various forums yesterday that people were already jacking up the price to $350.
Well, at that point,
When-
why pay $350
Well,
for
exactly.
a mid-range?
I don't know.
For a mid-range graphics
It's
card.
strange. It's strange.
I guess if you're a collector, maybe that's what it would be.
But the entry level price is $250,
Uh-huh.
and it's $300 for the Founders Edition that most people reviewed.
Okay, so this is the GTX 1060 that just officially launched yesterday. What's the difference between a Founders Edition and the Standard Edition?
Well, normally when they introduce a card, NVIDIA will put out their reference version.
Is it autographed or
And
something?
that's, yeah, signed by, yeah.
Mr. Nvidia signs it?
Yeah, Mr. NVIDIA. They'll put out their own version of the card, usually with what they call a blower design. So one fan takes in air at the end and pushes it out the back of the system.
Okay.
And usually the card it's base clocked. It's sitting right at the sort of product release point, and it's usually normally at least they're about the same price. But there aren't many. There aren't many of these floating around, and normally there isn't much of a reason to buy them because the third-party cards come out shortly after, and they overclock the chips, they bin them for higher things, and they put their own coolers on them so people get different sorts of cooling.
So it really
You better options. You better options and faster cards if you go for the third party normally.
Okay.
In this case, with the 10 series release, Nvidia has been doing what they call Founders Editions, which is they're saying it's still a blower design, but it's premium, and they add these on the 1070 and 1080 they've got a vapor chamber and all this extra stuff, and they're more expensive. So they end up being, I think it's like a $50 premium, at least on the 1060. So you pay $250 if you get an MSI or an EVGA or the kind of cards that people actually normally buy.
Right.
Or you can right now spend $300 and you can get the Nvidia Founders Edition, in the big titanium thing.
Right. Flames painted on it and all kinds of stuff.
No, that you got to go for the other ones.
That's the undercoat. You got to upsell for that part. Okay, so what else can you tell us about this 1060? So this is there's a reason that Nvidia is going for this, right? Because of what kind of happened already, what AMD has been doing.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why we're framing this as AMD versus Nvidia, because this is where the battle is happening right now. So AMD released the RX 480.
Right, which is aimed at that same kind of mid-range consumer market.
Right.
Not the top-end, super expensive stuff, but just like a general gamer, somebody who just wants to play some games. This would probably be where you would go, right?
And we saw that, with the RX 480. It was really an appeal to gamers' hearts and wallets. That it was like, this is what people spend, and so AMD did sort of this like the populist gamer type thing. And that was sort of how they reached out. As they said, it's a $200 card for the 4 gig and $240 for the 8 gig, as opposed to $250 for the 6 gigabyte 1060.
Okay. So this is kind of what Nvidia's trying to go after.
Yeah, they're the same.
So they want to hit that. Now, do you think did they go for this because they were seeing such a hit in sales because of AMD, or do they really view it as a threat? Like these mid-level cards?
They went for it because it's just something you always go for. These cards are planned out way in advance, so the fact that AMD released one last month doesn't have an
That doesn't mean they
really
just quick, we got to come out with one right now. They didn't design this a week ago.
But this has always been a really important part of the market for actually getting your cards in the hands of the most gamers, because gamers don't buy the high-end cards are what everyone talks about, but they're not what everyone buys.
Right.
And so it's sort of a hearts and minds thing, and so that's where the battle is happening right now. I mean, that's specifically what AMD said when they came out with the RX 480. They were specifically like, they came out with the RX 480 first as their first example of their new architecture, as opposed to Nvidia came out with the high-end cards first, and AMD was like, we're doing this because we want the hearts and minds of gamers, and we want to be the everyman gamer's card. And
is it really just because they can't create the same product?
It's
hard for them to compete.
That's hard to say for sure, but it seems possible.
Okay, so what is like as far as reviews for the 1060? Now I know the RX 480 got a lot of really good reviews. Is the 1060 getting good reviews so far?
I would say the reviews are positive.
Okay,
but perhaps mixed.
Okay.
So let's talk about the good stuff first. The good stuff is the GTX 1060, which has 6 gigabytes of RAM, is very fast in a large number of games. The benchmarks are generally finding that it has a lead over the RX 480 8 gigabyte, which is a $240 card, in games like GTA 5, Metro Last Light, Battlefield 4, and sometimes the leads are pretty significant. I think the biggest one I saw was a PC Perspective review of the GTX 1060, was looking at an over 30% improvement of the GTX 1060 versus the RX 480. So Nvidia's card was 30% faster at 1080p.
That's pretty significant.
And I think it was actually like 38%.
I saw 38% on GTA 5.
GTA 5. Yeah. So that's, was that what I said earlier? If not, that's what I meant to say. GTA 5, 38% faster. So that's, wow, that's a big improvement, right?
Yeah.
Like if they're around the same price. So that's a good thing. A lot of the benchmarks are showing an advantage for the GTX 1060. The other good thing, which is the power draw. So we talked in an earlier podcast about how the RX 480 had a whole thing come about with it drawing too much power over the motherboard PCI lanes.
Which does what? It just overheats, or
It has the potential to damage the motherboard theoretically.
okay.
And in any case, the RX 480 was drawing more power than AMD said it would, which is unusual. That's not really ideal.
Yeah.
It means you're out of specification. Now, reviews are finding the GTX 1060, which is quoted at 120 watt thermal design power, is drawing that or lower, and it's not putting excessive loads over any of the components. It draws power over, that being the motherboard or the actual power supply cable. And that shows that if this card is getting better performance generally with lower power draw, that means NVIDIA's architecture is still more efficient.
Better than AMD's. Now, and so that's kind of, so the reviews are looking pretty good then, I guess, to sum it up, kind of just for the 1060. So let me ask you this, let's get to the bottom of this debate here. AMD versus Nvidia. Why is it that people pick sides so much when it comes down to these cards? To these companies? Is it just brand loyalty? And I'm asking just honestly, why such a debate?
I think, one of the things about building a PC and putting together a gaming PC and optimizing it is that there isn't always a right answer.
Yeah.
There are oftentimes, it's easy to say that's wrong.
Is this like a Chevy versus Ford kind of thing?
Yeah, it's sort of like, it's like if you need those things or you like them, and we've seen that there are some feature differences. If you go NVIDIA, you get Ansel, and if you go towards AMD, you get some maybe better VR stuff down the road that they've been talking about.
Right.
And especially one thing we haven't talked about yet, which is DirectX 12, which I'm sure we'll get to. But there are reasons to go to both sides, and people do take it emotionally. That there is an attachment there when you spend $500 on a graphics card, you want to justify your decision. It's the same thing when you ask someone who has an Apple Watch if they like it.
Right.
They'll always be like, "It's great, I love it, I use it all the time, it's the best thing ever," because they just spent a few $100 on it and they don't want to look like it.
Somewhere there's a Calvin and Hobbes sticker where Calvin's peeing on an AMD logo
sure.
or something. Yeah, okay. So all right, so it's that emotional investment. Just you get into that, and that's where I want to be. And I'm curious for people watching right now too. Hop in there and let us know where you stand on this, on AMD versus Nvidia. We're going to get into this more, but I want to know what your questions are, what your comments, if you have a side, why are you on that side, and what your rationale is behind it. I mean, I'm sure you have a good one, but I'd love to see them here in the YouTube comments. So AMD versus Nvidia, and this is the battle that's going on now. These two are the top manufacturers, correct? I mean, how would you look at this?
I mean, there really isn't another option.
If
you want, there's I was looking at a Power VR card, which has some real-time ray tracing and things like that. But if you're looking for a mainstream graphics card, you've got to choose one side or the other. There's no,
There's no debate in between there.
Right. Well, there's just no third party.
Yeah, there is no other one.
No one has the resources. So.
Okay, so currently, with the competition between the two, where does it stand right now?
Well, I think maybe we should talk about some of the things that were the bad side of the GTX 1060.
Sure, yeah, go for it. Yeah,
Brad,
let's go back into that.
You brought up DirectX 12 performance, and why don't you talk a little bit about what happened with that?
Their thing about DirectX 12 is, you talk about games like GTA 5 or Battlefield.
And real quick, DirectX 12 is Microsoft's.
Yeah, so that's what I was.
Platform,
That's their graphical API, and the way that works is that there's newer feature sets in DirectX 12, but your card has to support them. And these cards have varying levels of support for the new features and the new optimizations that come with that. And it turns out that something that people have seen is that these AMD cards, especially the new ones, tend to have a slightly higher level of support for DirectX 12, specifically in the form of what they call async compute.
Okay.
And it's just literally what it sounds like. The card is able to handle multiple operations. It's able to take some of its load and say, I'm going to, while I'm working on rendering this scene, I'm going to figure out this physics thing and then re-import it back into the line. And that's, that tends to, in games like Ashes of the Singularity, which is one of the few DirectX 12 games, period. There aren't very many of them at all.
Yeah.
The RX 480 actually takes a lead over the 1060. And it's similar. We saw a similar thing sort of with the RX 480, where AMD initially showed off two of them running on DirectX 12 multi-GPU, and that was beating a 1080 in this Ashes of the Singularity test. So there's something to be said for that now most games that you play, 98% of them are DirectX 11 or something else, or Vulkan is something else that we can talk about too. But new games that come out are increasingly going to rely on DirectX 12, And when you get into that, the performance gap is a lot narrower if the AMD cards don't take a lead.
Okay.
Yeah, the performance. What's interesting about the performance of the AMD cards is they are better able to take both GPU and compute commands together and process them through the card. And so, Ashes of Singularity is a game that's often used as a benchmark, but something this time around we also saw Hitman be used a lot as a benchmark, and that's I think is sort of a more popular title, sort of a more mainstream title for a lot of people, and it shows this being used in a way that I think is more applicable to the kind of games most people play. Hitman is using them to create like these big crowds of AI characters that are just moving around. And AMD was doing really well in those situations. So that sort of is what takes the edge off the GTX 1060s.
I was going to say, well, so the AMD was doing well in that. Was the 1060 doing poorly in it, or just AMD was just already known for it, and so that's kind of
the 1060 wasn't doing poorly. I think the 1060, to give another perspective, is generally performing like a GTX 980 would, and that was an over $500 graphics card last generation. So it's a very fast card for the price compared to what we've seen before. But this sort of brings up the question of looking forward, like you're buying this card now, and we can see now the GTX 1060 is the faster card in most games. But gamers might ask themselves, what about DirectX 12? And in 2 or 3 years, what am I going to be using? And is the 1060 still going to be faster? And I don't think there's an easy answer to that question right now. It kind of makes this competition more nebulous than you would have expected, and it definitely that's what, more than anything else, is what is giving AMD a room for competition right now.
It's because we don't know where it's going to go with the DirectX.
Yeah, and because they sort of have the lead in the cutting edge graphics API. Another thing that we should touch on real quickly is SLI support. Doesn't support it, does it?
Not
explain real quick, just to explain SOI support.
SLI is Nvidia's proprietary technology for having
what I just said there.
For having to I'll just pretend no one where you can put 2 cards in, and basically the way it used to work is you attach them with this bridge, and it basically renders back and forth on each card. So each card renders a frame, and it puts them in together. And now this is something that they've said they're not doing with the 1060. That the 1060 doesn't have a way to connect 2 cards together, at least through Nvidia's platform. I'm always getting confused about. There's like 3 different kinds of multi GPU support. There's like link display, implicit and explicit, but basically you can't easily do this like you could with even like a 750 or what was it?
SLI itself is not supported on the 1060. Whether or not there might be other ways to get multiple cards that work together through DirectX 12,
there are, but
that would have to be enabled per game, basically.
Which
but
so
SLI
each
itself,
game you would have to change it up.
And it has to, the developer has to enable it. So in this case, the only game that you can run 2 1060s together is Ashes of the Singularity, because it supports DirectX 12 multi-GPU. So DirectX 12 has its own standard for multiple GPUs, and these will use that, but they won't use the same SLI setup.
God, you got to really love that game then to...
Well,
you would really have to.
And the thing is, the fact that most people won't be buying multiple 1060s means that most developers won't be working on creating a DirectX 12 multi-GPU version of their game.
Yeah,
gotcha.
It's sort of this cycle where they say no SLI, so developers say we're not going to bother, so they continue to say no SLI, and
so it just keeps going.
It just keeps going like that until it's gone.
And the RX 480 does still support Crossfire.
Up to 4.
You can buy multiple RX 480s and have them work together in not all games, but most games. And you can't do that and expect that with a 1060.
But why would you buy multiple RX 480s when you just buy a higher end single one?
In the case of AMD, there isn't. That is the high end card.
Yeah, that is
so
the high
if
end.
you want a
so
high end AMD
be...
setup, that's how you do it.
Okay.
As opposed to this, where if the real problem is with the performance boost that you normally see from an SLI setup, 2 1060s at $250 a piece would easily beat a 1080, because 2 980s in SLI would probably beat a 1080, I would expect. And So that means that that Nvidia would be undercutting their own product.
Okay.
That there would be an easy option for people to say, like, I'm not going to bother trying to hunt down a 1080 when they're in short supply. I'll just pick up two 1060s, throw them in my case, and I've saved myself $150.
Yeah.
And I've got better performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you do have to look at that and have to kind of scratch your head and be like, so did Nvidia do this for the reasons they say they do, which is like, trying to make their development more efficient, blah blah blah, or did they just look at the numbers and go, oh my god, maybe people will buy two 1060s instead of a 1080 and just take it off? We don't know for sure, but it certainly looks a little suspicious. Another thing that is a potential downside of the GTX 1060, and at this point I feel like we're being really harsh on it. The 1060 is a great card. If you want to buy a $250 video card, it's probably your better option right now. But I am a little disappointed that it is $250 minimum, which I feel like
because
is not actually the mid-range anymore.
What would you consider mid-range? And just to reset too for anybody who's tuning in right now to the live show, we're talking about the GTX 1060 and just AMD versus Nvidia overall. So with the and feel free to drop in your comments there as well. Like, let us know which side you're on, maybe why you're on that side, and what your justifications are for being that. So you think that there is something there with that?
I mean, this is entirely like this made up, like,
right? Conspiracy theory. We're going
like
into
brackets.
GPU conspiracy theorists.
There's no like agreed upon definition.
This is what Reddit's saying right now.
For me, the mid range is $200 and probably around 150 up to around 250, and I say that mostly based on my historical like perceptions of the video cards we've been getting in the past and what they were capable of. Oftentimes we've had the $200 price point be this sort of like, this is the card you can get and it has most of the performance you need, and you don't have to pay any more than that. That's how it's been even with some past Nvidia cards. At $250 for most cards and $300 for the Founders Edition, I think the 1060
autographed.
Is really for the autograph. You're really pushing like that's really pushing the
That's
price.
all I could see, really. Yeah.
And so you can get the RX 480 for $200, and that's a great mid-range price point. So I would kind of count that as a downside to the 1060 as well. Of course, we'll probably see a 1050 or something come out, but
I will say it seems like Nvidia is trying to almost like counter some of their own number inflation. That things have gotten, like, there's the 980 and then there's the 980 Ti and then there's the Titan, and it seems like they've sort of with the 1080 they were sort of like, we're going to take these people who are at 980 Ti Titan levels, and this is their card now, like this is the top end card, and then people who were using a 980 are going to switch down to the 1070, and people who are using a 970, which was one of the most popular graphics cards in recent memory, are going to move to the 1060. It's the same price point, and it offers, a little bit better power performance. That's when you're looking at, we see these things that there's incremental performance upgrades on each generation of these cards. As much as they love to say, like, this is the 10 series and it's 4 million times better than the 900 series, and that's super awesome. It's an incremental upgrade over the 970 in the same way that the 970 was an incremental upgrade over the 770. It's,
Gotcha.
But in this case, I think they're trying to sort of drop those numbers back down so that they can sort of keep people in that main mid-range being their 1050 to 1080. That's the range, rather than now they're not going to do, they may not do a 1090 and then a 1090 Ti and then an 1100, it just gets kind of crazy.
Right. That seems like a lot. It seems a little bit of an overkill. Yeah. At a certain point.
Especially when you're 1080, most people are saying is sort of almost overkill already.
Yeah. Well, there's also, and I know, Matt, you wanted to bring this up too, about Intel and whether... I guess I'll let you lead this because I'm not exactly sure how you wanted to bring this up. Whether an Intel IGP is good enough.
We should we should probably mention, if we're talking about AMD versus Nvidia, like where Intel is right now, because they've been trying really hard to.
They've been trying to get into
get their integrated graphics up to par, and I think the short answer is that they haven't really been successful in that, and that's why a lot of people are still looking at AMD versus Nvidia as being the premier battle. Yeah. So Intel loves to say they have the most graphics chips out there of any company. And that's because whenever you buy an Intel processor, almost whenever you buy an Intel processor, you also get Intel integrated graphics. You don't really have a choice. You can't go in with a scalpel and cut it off.
Right.
It's going to be there whether you want it or not. And
it's like getting an Android phone and saying, "Oh, I have Google Play." Great.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
Google Play Store
yeah.
is
Yeah.
So-
You know,
everywhere.
everybody uses Google Play.
So we end up testing a lot of Intel IGPs, and especially in mobile form factors, and they just, the truth is they're really not good enough in most incarnations.
Gotcha.
They struggle even at 1080p with the latest games. There is only one category of exceptions there, I think, is the iris graphics, which we've tested. Like, Brad, you're using this Dell XPS 13 right now. That has a iris, like HD 550, something like that.
So.
And that can handle some games pretty well.
I was just pulling that up.
It's
So you're saying that it can handle some of
Yeah, and so if you're comparing that to like not like a GTX 960M sort of solution, but to like a 940M,
so like a lower end.
let's say, you could possibly look at the Intel thing and say that that's good enough.
How far away is Intel from being into this discussion of Nvidia and AMD?
Pretty far.
Yeah, they're pretty far. If you want to do like serious gaming, if you want to like hit 60 frames per second and play at 1080p, which is becoming less of the standard and more the like entry level.
norm, yeah.
Yeah, this system, I mean, like this i7 XPS 13, it averages 30 frames per second with the quality up on Heroes of the Storm at 1080p, which is, any kind of dedicated card here is going to get at least 60. I mean, even like mobile, like even gaming laptops get 70, 80 plus.
Yeah.
So they're you can't expect to bust out Fallout 4 and play on Intel, even though we tried that.
Yeah.
And it went very poorly.
Yeah.
We tried the new, what was it, the Skull Canyon NUC. And it's supposed to be like their gaming NUC. It's got like the skull on it, and it just didn't work. There were incompatibilities.
Well, and I think you just basically answered this, but we do have a question here. As far as a gamer is concerned, is AMD or Intel the processor to go? Does the extra cores on AMD processors help it in gaming?
Oh, well, as far as the processor is concerned,
Yeah.
and let's talk about the CPU, the compute power of it, Intel is generally the way to go.
Okay.
Just because they have much faster cores, and the added cores in the AMD processors usually don't help that much, because most games are multi-threaded to an extent, but they're only going to be taking advantage of probably a quad core at the best. So yeah, you want to go Intel usually.
Unless you're planning on spending less than $100 on your processor.
Right.
And even then you could look at AMD, but even then they're like the Pentium G3258 is a really great chip for 60 to 80 bucks.
Well, and getting more into it too here, just talking about a couple of things that I know we wanted to get to before we wrap up. And again, if you have more questions, go ahead and pop those in there onto the YouTube channel, and we'll get to those. But which has better drivers? I know one of the questions that you wanted to get to, Matt.
Yeah, the driver question is interesting.
Yeah.
And it's actually
From
interesting
between AMD
even
or
bringing
NVIDIA.
it up with Intel, because to talk about Intel real quick, that when we had the problem with Fallout 4, that's a driver level issue.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big problems with Intel that's been consistent is their driver support is not good. So you have all these weird glitches sometimes in games. And that's part of what contributes to Intel falling behind. With Nvidia versus AMD, it's become really interesting because they have a lot of different features that they throw at you. Like AMD, they have FreeSync, which is frame synchronization, and whereas Nvidia has G-Sync, which does the same thing, but in a slightly different way.
And for more money.
And for more money.
You have to pay extra for a monitor because it has to have NVIDIA's chip inside of it, whereas FreeSync is part of the display standard.
Right.
Gotcha.
And the counter argument to that is that there's perhaps some evidence that NVIDIA's solution is better, which I think is something that Brad and I have debated about. And the articles
We need more testing to come to anything.
and the articles that have shown that are now like kind of out of date because they were from last year. So anyway, but that's one example, and there's many. AMD has its entire, like, drivers have become kind of an entire platform. So the RX 480, you open it up and you have the AMD driver software, and it lets you do things like overclock your GPU. It lets you change settings in all these different games. It lets you put down global settings that'll take effect in all games. And Nvidia has its own solution that does a lot of the same things. Personally, I prefer Nvidia by a little bit, but
I wouldn't say. I mean, I wouldn't say when I set up a system that I install either of those suites. To be totally honest, I usually install the driver and don't bother. But I do prefer, what do they call it, Vulkan, or not Vulkan? They have a name for it. I can't remember what it is for AMD's
drivers.
But it's yeah. They both used to be kind of janky, and I would say that AMD's has improved more lately. With a cleaner UI and some more clearer feature support.
AMD's got they called it the Crimson Edition last time they came out with it. And NVIDIA's is the GeForce Experience. And I think that they've gotten a lot closer than they used to be. I still kind of prefer NVIDIA because I kind of prefer G-Sync, and I think that they're a little bit better about getting out updates in a timely manner. Driver updates, like when new games come out and etc.
Yeah, I was going to say that's part of it too, is that Nvidia tends to have more relationships with the big developers, so they're able to get these game-ready drivers that improve performance ahead of time, and they also work with some of these companies to bring things like PhysX and Hairworks into their games natively, which again, that's sort of another trade-off, is if you go AMD, a lot of the time you miss out on things like that. I think it was Witcher 3, hair was a big deal. That, like, the fact that his hair was being rendered by this special thing on NVIDIA cards meant a significant boost in frame rate over AMD cards at first, because AMD cards were like, well, we can't do hair like that.
It's almost like you got to pick which kind of game you want to play, and then base it on there. Like, if you really want to play Witcher 3 for all of that, then I guess you have to make that choice. And go with that route. Well, let's start to kind of wrap it up here. And just for anybody tuning in, you can always go back and watch this video at the beginning where gave an in-depth review of the GTX 1060. And I guess the bottom line is, between these two mid-range cards, is there one that is clearly better between the RX 480 or the GTX 1060? Nvidia, AMD, the ultimate showdown.
Well,
let's
both give our opinions. I would say I would go with the 1060.
Your Desert Island GPU.
I would go with the GTX 1060. The reason I would go with the GTX 1060 is because it's faster right now. It uses less power. And I prefer NVIDIA's overall drivers and driver experience.
Okay.
So that would get my vote, with the caveat that it is a $250 base level card. And I think for some people, like I said earlier, that extra $50 is not really an option.
Yeah.
And the RX 480 is $200, so if you only got that much to spend, it's a perfectly reasonable choice.
See, I think I'm falling on the RX 480 side of this. I think their commitment to open standards like FreeSync and upcoming technologies like DirectX 12 and Vulkan, not Mantle, I think that's a really important factor. Even if you're buying a mid-range card, that you have to think about a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, what games am I going to be playing and what am I going to be doing with it? And I think the $200 price point too, again, is susceptible to a little more price movement for third-party cards than that Founders Edition $250 point or $300 Founders Edition point. Okay,
all right. So Brad going AMD. Matt going NVIDIA. There we go. The challenge is set. So direct your comments there. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. So this is Close to the Metal. We do this every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time right here at digitaltrends.com and on YouTube, and it's live. And we want to hear your comments, what you guys want to talk about. We go in depth to a lot more of an extent than we do on the other shows that we do here. So feel free to email us anytime, podcast@digitaltrends.com, and let us know what you want to discuss. Like I said, go back, watch this video, share it, tell your friends, do all of that stuff, and go ahead and keep leaving your comments here in the chat, and we'll take a look and go through there. And if there's some things that we can answer for you, then we'll go ahead and do that. Check out the full review at digitaltrends.com, and we will see you next week with another episode.